I'm going to start this by showing a spoiler of Messmer's Phase 2 opening attack hitting me while I am not wearing any armor. So if you don't want to see that, skip to the time on screen. But you only have a couple of seconds before... Oh no! Now that I've shown you that I'm going to be able to show you to do this even fully naked, let's show you how this actually looks in our proper build that will be at the end of the video. Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, Shadow of the Erdtree is hard. It is difficult, it is made to be so, and it will beat you down if you don't prepare correctly, and if you don't treat it with the right amount of respect. I've seen a lot of people saying that the game is too hard, too difficult, to the point that it is massively affecting the review scores for the game, and while I could just sit here and give my opinion on that whole thing one way or the other, or tell people to stop being so unwilling to use spirit summons if they need them, I'd rather buckle down and just give you a full step-by-step guide on how to make yourself a genuine, unkillable tank in Elden Ring, taking as little damage per hit as possible while soaking it up with massive health pools. Are bosses killing you in 2 hits? Well, what if I told you you could change that into like 15 or more, even while nearly fully naked? We'll go over this piece by piece because there are a lot of aspects of this that can apply to literally any build you are using if you work them in, but you can only use these things in the first place if you know what they are and what they're for. As we go through it, I'll be putting them all together one by one, optimizing them to work together, first by talking about every way to increase your maximum health, then by diving into the nitty-gritty of damage negations and defense specifically, and if you want to really just experience the absolute pinnacle of tankiness in the game, well, we'll turn it into a full-on build that you can follow if you want to as well. And for those who are already complaining that I'm showing this against early DLC enemies and bosses, that's why the intro was what it was. I just want to avoid spoiling people who are still in the open area of the DLC, as I imagine they could use this information, possibly even more so than those who are later on in the expansion. And just in general, there are timestamps in the video, so you can skip around a bit, maybe you just want to see the build if you don't care about all the other tips and information. Starting off then, let's talk about HP, your maximum health. The main thing that this scales with to begin with is the Vigor stat. This is a pretty significant soft cap at 60 for your maximum health. 99 Vigor, for comparison, is 2100, but 60 is 1900. So a very, very small gain for 39 extra levels spent in that stat. That said, for the sake of this, I will start at 99 Vigor in this clip just to show the literal maximums of each thing when putting it together. But know that any footage in this specific section, I could be doing way more damage by just sticking all those extra points into strength to boost the weapon scaling and lose a very small amount of health, relatively speaking. That said, Vigor creates what is known as your base maximum health. Most other health bonuses are percentage increases, and they work off of this base, so the higher your original health pool, the more of an impact the percentage increases actually have. For example, there's the Crimson Amber Medallion +3. There was a +2 version of this talisman in the base game that was a 7.5% maximum health increase, but the +3 in Shadow of the Erdtree is a 10% increase instead. This is found quite early in the DLC, if you know where to go, in the Fog Rift Catacombs, which you can easily reach from the Castle Front side of Grace beside Castle Ensis, and this is just given as a reward for defeating the boss at the end of this. The next talisman that helps with this is the Erdtree's Favor +2 talisman. This gives you 4% bonus health, 9.6% bonus maximum stamina, and 8% bonus maximum equipment load. This is a base game item found in Lanedell specifically after the city has turned to ash at that point in the story, and you get it by going back into the city from the mountaintop of the giant side, and it's located right in this spot on your map. Past that, there is also armor that helps with this, specifically the Fire Knight Helmet, which is a new one in the DLC. It is essentially just a mini Erdtree talisman on your head, giving you 2% bonus maximum health, 4% bonus maximum stamina, and 4% bonus maximum equip load for having it on. With equip load being important here as well, as that also means that you can wear heavier armor for larger damage negations, and this one is farmed from the Fire Knight enemies around the game. The easiest of these to farm is right down the elevator from the storehouse first floor site of grace. You can apply buffs while you are descending the elevator, send the elevator right back up on your way out, kill the Fire Knight outside, and then teleport to the grace to repeat a very fast loop. This is a relatively low drop chance item though, so you may be here for a bit. I myself farmed this for nearly an hour before it dropped, to the point that I had multiple of every other thing in its loot table first, but it is really genuinely quite powerful as long as you don't mind the fashion of it. Then we have the Wondrous Flask of Physic, and there are multiple things that you can do with this. There is the classic base game Crimson Spill Crystal Tier. This gives you 10% bonus health for 3 minutes, which is honestly long enough for most boss fights in the game to be over. And then technically, you could use things like the brand new Crimson Sapping Crystal Tier, which restores health on hits, but that is only really worth it with extremely fast-hitting weapons, as it heals less than 1% health per hit while it's active. And even then, I would say if you are after tankiness, there are just better options, which I will explain more in the damage negation section of the video. Finally, for raising maximum health, there are great runes, and the best one for this specific purpose is Morgott's Great Rune from the base game, which raises your maximum health by 25% while active, and this stays active until death. Importantly as well, unlike most of the health boosting upgrades, this one scales its percentage increase off of your total maximum health, not the base number that you get from your vigor. So this 25% increase takes into account any other health boost that you have as well underlying under it. In total, with the new ways of boosting health further in Shadow of the Erdtree, at 99 vigor, fully capped out with all the rest of this, the new maximum health possible in the game is 3,369, nice, which is around 4% higher than the old cap of 3,243. With 60 vigor instead, the soft cap, and every other one of these things still active, you get 3,048, which is still so much higher than the average player's max health, which most people just sit at 1,900. Though that is only one half of the equation really. Health is really very important, as having a bigger health pool means it takes more hits to kill you, but Crimson Flasks, your healing, heal a set amount, a flat amount of health, not a percentage, so having high raw health but low damage negation isn't necessarily the ideal answer either, though there are talismans like the new Crimson Seed +1 that actually significantly increase the amount that you heal each time you use a flask, and this talisman can honestly be a pretty big difference on its own for survival too that is worth mentioning. When deciding whether to prioritize having a higher health or higher damage negation, you just need to do a bit of small math for something called effective health. Effective health calculates damage reductions into your maximum health to tell you what equivalent health number would take the same amount of damage as a percent of the health bar, but with no damage negation stats. How you work this out is simply by increasing your HP number by your damage negation stats. If you have, let's say, 50% physical damage negation, you take 50% damage from physical attacks. That means that your effective health against physical damage is 50% higher than your normal maximum health. In other words, if you have 1900 maximum health by default, and you want only one slot for a defense thing, let's say you're choosing between one option that gives you 50% physical damage negation, the other option gives you bonus maximum health. For these to be of equivalent value to physical damage specifically, the maximum health bonus would need to be 950 or 50% of your maximum health. That said, the other two things to consider are that damage negation rarely applies to all damage types at the same time, whereas raw maximum health affects every bit of incoming damage, and that again, raw maximum health does actually make Crimson Flasks weaker in comparison than focusing damage negation, because if you take less damage per hit, then you simply require less healing. To explain how these numbers work then, for those who don't know, defense, the flat number on the left side of your stat sheet here in this section, reduces the damage of each incoming hit by that flat number. With these stats, you reduce every incoming hit by 140 damage. Then past that, it is reduced as a percentage by the number that's on the right, the damage negation stat. So let's say that you get hit for 200 damage, and you have 140 defense and 70% damage negation. You would first reduce the damage of that down to 60, then reduce that number by 70%, which would result in a final damage taken of 18, down from 200 as the base number. With that, you can see just how important having these stats in the right place are, with defense being much more important for smaller, faster hits, and damage negation being much more important for larger singular hits. That's how you avoid getting one shot, is damage negation. And that's the majority of things things that you're honestly probably scared of in the DLC. So with all that said, first things first, take off your damage negation reducing gear, whatever it is. If you're using sore seals or scar seals or the various elemental boosting scorpion charm talismans, any and all of these things will actually reduce your damage negation stats and then increase the damage that you take as a result. And while that stuff can be extremely useful if you're already overpowering a boss, if you're over leveled, if you're trying to one-shot something with a crazy high damage build, if you're playing the base game, honestly, they still have a lot of use. But they simply make you take more damage when you get hit with them on, and if you're having issues with surviving in the DLC and you are using any of these, they should be the first thing that you immediately take off of your character to try and fix this problem. With all that said then, let's get into all the various methods of increasing your damage reduction, starting with things that you can do in any build. Earlier I mentioned that we wouldn't really want a second health-based tier in our Wondrous Flask of Physic if the goal was pure tankiness, and that's because you would much rather have the Opaline Hard tier from the base game. This gives you straight up plus 15% flat all damage negation, meaning both physical and elemental, and lasts for 3 minutes. As you see, while fully naked, if I drink my flask with this upgrade, I hit 15% damage negation. Past that, there is a consumable item that people tend to use a lot if they are PvP tryhards, but most people would never really consider it for PvE if they aren't, until, you know, Shadow of the Erdtree has turned out to be as hard as it is, and this is Boiled Crab. It increases your physical damage negation by 20% for 60 seconds after you eat it, which, due to the way that damage negation stack in this game, puts you up to around 32% physical damage negation while fully naked, with the other buff as well. You can buy it for 600 runes a piece from Blackguard Big Boggart in the base game. You do have to progress his quest until he moves to Lane Dell so that you can actually buy this from his inventory, or if he dies after he moves in his shop updates, you can get his bell bearing and then buy it from the Twin Maiden husks that the Round Table hold instead, which is much more convenient. Past that, another consumable that anyone can use, which is Golden Vow. Now this is actually new as a consumable in the expansion, but it is the same effect you may already know of. Golden Vow is a buff that raises all damage you do by 15% and increases all damage negation stats by 10%. There is an incantation version of this that requires 25 faith to cast and lasts for 80 seconds after you cast it. There is an Ash of War version that lasts for 45 seconds that you can apply to many different weapons if you're willing to carry around a bonus offhand just for this, or there is a new tool version of this, which is just a consumable that also lasts for 45 seconds like the Ash of War. The consumable is infinitely craftable if you farm the materials, and the cookbook that unlocks it as a recipe is found right here in front of the Shadow Keep in the camp of Messmer soldiers. Here is what it looks like to get there from the southern side of the camp, just so you can see the exact spot that it's in. Past that, there are also talismans for this too. There's the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman from the base game, which is just an absolute pile of physical damage negation, again, even while naked. And there are the Drake talismans too, which all provide more specific damage negations. If you are against a boss that has a lot of fire damage, as a good example, you could use the Fire Resistance talisman. Another example of a talisman that technically results in damage negation is the Great Jar's Arsenal talisman, as this increases your maximum equipment load by a bit under 20%. This allows you to wear just heavier armor, which results in heavier defenses. Generally, I do consider equip load, though, and armor to be the final frontier of damage negation, though, as Fashion Souls is absolutely real and important, and I'm trying to make a sort of point here that you can just hit incredibly high damage negation even while fully and completely naked, so you shouldn't feel compelled to use a specific armor set unless you are really struggling. That said, using all these things together with heavy armor simply makes you a nearly unbreakable tank, with all these things applied together with the Bull Goat armor set, the most defensive set in the game, resulting in a little bit under 70% physical damage negation and 43% damage negations to all elements, not to mention the freedom to boost those further with the resistance talismans like I've done for lightning here to reach 57% resistance. Then finally, scadutree blessings, of which I am currently at level 10 out of 20 in this footage. I know, right? I hadn't even mentioned these blessings until this point, and we are this goddamn deep into the video. But the point of doing it in this order and talking about these things in this order is to show that even the options the game gives you with scadutree Scadutree Blessing level 0 are so immense that you don't even actually need blessing levels if you know how to use the rest of these systems to their peak. That said, Scadutree Blessings increase all this stuff even further, increasing your damage negations. Specifically, they seem to have a larger effect the lower your damage negation is, so this actually becomes less impactful as you get better at raising your damage negation through other methods, and this also raises your damage in general with each level as well. So absolutely do get these. Don't feel bad for doing it, don't feel bad for applying the levels. If you are struggling, get more fragments. If that's not enough, that's what the entire rest of this video is for. One last thing to mention then in relation to all of this is Poise, and what it actually does, because there does seem to be some misconceptions about this in the community at large. What Poise does is then, at certain thresholds, depending on the attack that hits you, reduce the flinch of that hit. At 0 Poise, an attack may knock you flat on the ground. At 30 Poise, that same move may just interrupt the attack that you're doing and give you a minor flinch, and at 50 Poise, the same move may just phase through you entirely, not interrupting your animations at all, but still dealing the damage. This threshold is different for every incoming hit, but an important thing to be aware of with Poise is there are actually negatives to stacking it poorly. If you get fully knocked down by an attack, you get a small grace period. You get a bit of iframes that if another attack hits you before you're able to roll out of it, you just won't take damage. If, however, you reach the first Poise breakpoint of said attack and no longer get thrown to the ground, you don't get these iframes, which opens you up to being comboed to death by attacks that would otherwise just be unable to do so. Then there is, of course, the final breakpoint of each attack where you just have full freedom of movement, and generally this is where Poise truly shines and pays off, as this lets you play with builds that let you heal and trade through the damage because you're just still able to act even if you are still taking damage. To sum that part up then, Poise is good, but there are ways that it can actually make certain fights harder for you. If you are dying because a combo is hitting you with multiple attacks in a row and you aren't able to raise your Poise high enough to just fully ignore it, then maybe it might actually be better to lower your Poise instead, enough that it fully throws you to the floor if you get hit by it instead, and then if you mess up a dodge, it is just less punishing because you have a little bit of time to recover. Finally then, let's put all this stuff together into a build, and of course we could lean fully into the theme and go like bulk out armor, every single damage reduction possible, but that just feels a little bit overkill, a bit pointless. So instead we're going to reach a point of being nearly unkillable, and then pivot all remaining space to damage boosts and Poise to make it much more functional as an actual build to just sort of play the game with. That said, we start this process with an extremely ridiculously synergistic Ash of War for this, which is Prayerful Strike. This Ash of War does a pretty solid amount of damage, scaling specifically with your weapon's attack power, which allows us to set a weapon to heavy scaling with this for maximum damage effectiveness. Importantly, this also actually heals you for 30% of your maximum health, while also giving you massive hyper armor during the windup and bonus Poise while it is being cast, which lets you trade hits with it and heal it right back up. This is effective for tankiness on pretty much any build that can use it, but obviously the more that you're boosting tankiness, the better this actually becomes, and now you can sort of easily see how this is all going to come together. As far as the weapon to actually put this on, it is a large singular hit, which tends to be better with bigger weapons, and the biggest that this can be put on are colossal weapons. The technically best weapon for this, thematically speaking, is Great Stars, a great hammer from the base game that has a minor effect of healing you for 1% of your maximum health per hit. It's extremely small, but hey, that does technically make it synergize better with this build than anything else really, but that is just such a minor thing that you would be trading for the significantly increased damage of just using a heavier, stronger weapon. The technical min-max best option is the Giant Crusher Hammer. It just has the highest attack power potential of any weapon that this skill can be applied to, and because the skill itself just scales with weapon damage, that is a really very big deal. That said, you can use this if you want and adjust the stats as needed, but I like using things that are new to the DLC whenever I can, even if it does make me a little tiny bit weaker. So that said, the only new colossal weapon in the DLC that can have Ashes of War infused in it is the Bloodfiend's Arm, and this thing does actually reach incredibly high scaling if you set it to heavy affinity when applying the Ash. This weapon is sort of honestly insane in bleed builds if you get it on bleed affinity and scale it with arcane, but we're not using it for any of that, just getting it set to heavy and then going unga bunga smashing with the giant stick. As far as actually getting this weapon for yourself then, it is a random drop from any of the Bloodfiend enemies that wield it. You can find a ton of them up on this hill to the west of the Gravesite Plains, which which is accessed quite easily. In my version of this build, I will be using the Golden Vow incantation just so it is consistently available and lasts the full 80 seconds, which means that you do need to have a seal. Anyone that has 0 weight is fine, even if it says that it doesn't function, because you can still cast buffs with 0 incantation scaling and they will apply at their regular value regardless. Then we have the Fire Knight helmet, of course for the maximum life, stamina, and equip load bonus, and for the rest of your 3 pieces of armor, you can either go Rakshasa armor, which is found in the Eastern Nameless Mausoleum over here. This gives you bonus damage per piece equipped at the cost of just being a lower damage negation armor set than is normal for its weight class. But given that our entire goal is to boost the hell out of the damage negation stat anyways, the actual hit from this armor choice is minimal. And while it does have lower damage negation, it does actually still have quite high poise, which is sort of exactly what we want for letting us spam Prayerful Strike a bit better anyways. If you don't want to min-max it this hard, you could just use these slots for fashion armor however you like them. For our talismans, the most important for tankiness is Dragon Crest Great Shield, then Erdtree's Favor +2, then Crimson Amber Medallion +3. Then I am using Shard of Alexander in the last slot for a nice hefty 15% damage boost on Prayerful Strike itself. It's also worth noting that if you are going against a boss that makes it hard to consistently use Prayerful Strike for whatever reason, just use a few of your flasks to actually be Crimson tiers instead of Cerulean, then use the Crimson Seed Talisman that I mentioned earlier in the video instead of the Crimson Amber max HP raise, and then your healing will actually start to put a dent in your massive health bar. Past that, don't forget the consumables that I mentioned earlier, and for your Wondrous Flask of Physic, you want the Opaline Hard tier absolutely for certain. Then either the Crimson Spill Crystal tier for 10% bonus maximum health, or if you want more damage instead of just 10% health, you could instead get funky with it and use the brand new Blood-Sucking Cracked tier. This increases your attack power by 20% at the cost of draining 23 health per second as a flat number. This lasts for 3 minutes, and in a normal build, 23 health per second for 180 seconds straight is sorta concerning. In a build that has stupidly high maximum health and heals 30% of that every time it uses the Ash of War, suddenly that becomes an incredibly reliable and easy 20% damage buff. Then finally there are your spells, both from the base game, Golden Vow for the damage buff and damage negation, and then Flame Grant Me Strength for a 20% physical and fire damage boost that lasts for 30 seconds after you cast it. The stats for this then, at level 150, are 60 Vigor, of course, 20 Mind, 24 Endurance, specifically if you are using the Rakshasa version of this setup, otherwise adjusted to fit your fashion choice, 54 Strength, which, well, two-handing your weapon makes it count as 81 Strength, just slightly above the soft cap, 11 Dexterity, 25 Faith, and 16 Arcane if you are using the Bloodfiend's arm. You should have points remaining after that as well, and the choice to make with these is either more Mind to let you cast Prayerful Strike more often between flasks, which I do think is generally the preferable option, or you could just pump them into Arcane for more damage gain on the weapon itself. To play the build, simply walk up to enemies, press Prayerful Strike, and then watch them die. Change all of your Crimson Flasks to Cerulean ones, because your Ash of War literally heals you more than a flask in a single use. So Cerulean Flasks let you use more of those, which means that you can last longer and longer in a fight if you fully bank off of that. This build is not a sprint, it is a marathon. You may not instantly do 14,000 damage in a single input, but you will simply outlast any and every boss in the entire game, in the entire DLC, if you build yourself in this full exact setup I've got here. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Just an extremely detailed deep dive and discussion about every way to make yourself take less damage in Shadow of the Erdtree, because I have genuinely been having an incredible time with this expansion, and through all the complaints of difficulty I've seen people say, all I really want is to help more people get to enjoy the satisfying parts of the DLC, rather than seeing you put the game down and walk away in frustration. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.